Weeks ago, the government of Guyana presented our draft of the nationally determined contributions for consultation. And just a few days ago, the President of Guyana launched the expanded low carbon development strategy for consultation. Now, these are two very important documents that will define our future and the future development strategy of the government of Guyana in the next 10 years. They're very important documents, and we have to be very careful that they're developed in a manner that takes account of the views of all Guyanese, and that they have a rigorous theoretical but also practical foundation for their implementation. I've said this because somehow in the public domain there is an impression created by many, and it's a misguided impression, that these documents will be presented at COP26. The former president of Guyana, Mr. David Granger, said in an interview that, I'd quote him directly, most Guyanese only became aware of what is likely to be a national presentation at Glasgow yesterday, and that was the day after President Ali launched the LCDS 2030. He had the mistaken impression that our low carbon development strategy would be presented at Glasgow, and that's far from the truth. In fact, there is no room by any country to present their national strategy in Glasgow. I've seen similar comments echoed by some elements in civil society. And I just want to assure these individuals, as well as the former president, that he shall have 4 months to comment on the low carbon development strategy, to share all their technical views, their popular views, or any other view for that matter. And they would all be taken into consideration when we finalize the document sometime in March of next year. And so I hope that everyone in civil society, the opposition, as well as Guyanese living abroad, will take the opportunity to share their views on this very important document. Now, we have gone through the reason why we are in the process of preparing a revised NDC. As you're aware, in 2016, the former government made a commitment under the Paris Agreement, and they pledged 100% renewable by 2025. Now, clearly, every Guyanese, every sane Guyanese, and we're all, I believe, sane people, would understand that if you make a pledge, then you have to fulfill it or put in place the projects to accomplish that pledge. So they pledge 100% renewable by 2025. No country in the world, not a single country, has made such a pledge. Not a single country has pledged even 50% of renewable by 2025. No country is achieving that, not even 50% renewable or by 2025. Yet we in Guyana, we pledge 100%. Now, clearly, Mr. Granger talks about consultations, and some of his minions have been saying the same thing too. But what consultation did they have in 2016 when they made such an unrealistic pledge on behalf of Guyana? So in his interview, I was hoping that the media would have asked him, how did you hope to accomplish this? Of course, they did not, because they could have never accomplished it. It's unrealistic. And so we have now to revise that pledge downwards, not that because we cannot achieve 100% renewable by 2025. No country in the world has done this, and we can't do it. And we have pointed out that we will achieve 50% reduction in emissions from that sector, the energy sector, by 2025, and by 2027, 2028, we'll probably go up to about 70% reduction in emissions from the energy sector. And that would be one of the leading indicators, or in fact, we would be foremost in the world if we achieve those numbers, and we intend to achieve them because we already have the projects either being awarded or on the implementation that would allow us to achieve those targets. So when Amanza Walton came to the consultation that we invited APNU to, instead of being productive and recognizing that they made a pledge that was totally unrealistic, that couldn't be grounded on any technical analysis or basis, and agreeing that we have no choice but to reduce that pledge, they said, no, we must stick with the pledge to achieve 100% renewable by 2025. No country in the world has achieved that, developed or developing, and will not achieve that until 2050 maybe. So I hear all about the lack of consultation and the shedding of crocodile tears about our Constitution, and various articles of our Constitution demand that we consult. Now, we are not going to submit the revised NDC before COP. So we have made it clear we will not finalize it until the LCDS is finalized, the public consultations. So it means that the NDCs or the revised NDC will not be finalized until after March of next year, until after the LCDS is finalized. So all of those who are under the mistaken impression that much of what has been done recently is only to be presented at COP, they simply do not understand what takes place at the conference of party negotiations. And so I heard, also I saw in yesterday's paper, a civil society grouping saying we should consult on the agenda for a government's agenda for COP, or we should have consulted on the government's agenda for COP and on the issues to be raised at COP. But that position clearly doesn't reflect a nuanced understanding of how these negotiations operate. Now, the last COP was held in 2019 in Madrid. Between the two COPs, 2019 and now the one in Scotland, there has been an ongoing discussion on the framework agreement. So the agenda is almost set. There are several issues that remain unresolved from all the negotiations at various conferences of the parties that have been held through since the UN convention was signed in 1992. There's been 25 of those. Now this is the 26th one. And they're working on a framework. So the agenda is set. The issues are defined already. So to think that you can go there and radically change what is being negotiated is wishful thinking. Now, clearly, your position can evolve on various matters, but there are certain issues that have been on the agenda. In the last couple of years, we have been sharing our positions on these matters, and those matters will come up in the negotiation here at the technical level. Let me tell you about the basic negotiating position. What is it? Because countries have to group themselves. They have different agendas. So you have the small island developing states as a group. You have the AOSIS group. You have the G77 and China. Then you have the OECD groups. You have a climate vulnerable group. You have the African Forum. All of these groups often have their own negotiating positions. And it is only through the solidarity between groups and within the groups that you'll be able to have a major impact in shifting the trajectory of the negotiation in one direction or another. But the content of the negotiation is predetermined. And if one were to read the CARICOM statement, the declaration on COP, you will see that within that declaration is the negotiating position of our region as a bloc. So we are, and the key elements of the negotiation would be, one, to support the developing world in getting, particularly the developed world, to raise the climate ambition. That is, to agree to emission cuts so that we can achieve net zero by 2050. Now, at this point in time, in spite of all the pledges from Paris and the enhanced pledges that have been made recently in the G20 meetings, the pledges are not enough for us to achieve a 1.5 degree Celsius or to keep temperature rises above 1.5, below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. We cannot, at the current level of pledging, achieve that target. If we do not achieve that target, there will be exponential catastrophic events as determined by the IPCC. And so, as a group and across groups, CARICOM, but many developing countries are asking for the developed world particularly to agree to decarbonize earlier, to steeper emission cuts. That's the first negotiating position. Secondly, we, as a bloc, we're asking for climate finance that was pledged since the Kyoto Protocol, but more particularly at Copenhagen, when at least $100 billion per year was promised to the developing world to assist in two areas, to allow them to finance the incremental costs of mitigation actions in their countries, and secondly, to finance the adaptation needs of these countries. And these were supposed to be grant resources, not loans or reclassified ODA. So the second negotiating position is that the developed world must keep their pledge of $100 billion, a minimum of $100 billion to the developing world. Secondly, that a significant part of that money must go to adaptation. Thirdly, the money should be incremental in the form of grants, because many developing countries cannot, their fiscal gap, their situation would not, and the debt overhang, fiscal situation and the debt overhang would not allow them to contract more loans. Therefore, they have to receive this funding in grant, and that there should be help for loss and damage. So that is the second big negotiating position as a bloc that we're taking. One, to raise ambition. Two, adequate financing. Thirdly, we are asking that the access to climate finance be improved dramatically. When we negotiated an institution to intermediate climate finance in the past, we made it clear that we wanted an institution that is not modeled after the current IFIs, the international financial institutions, with the bureaucracy that these institutions bring to intermediating financing. And the GCF was established for that purpose. And in the Paris Agreement, it made it very clear that they must have simplified access. This access has become a nightmare to the developing world. It is even more bureaucratic to access funds from this institution that was designed for a purpose than from other sources. So we met the head of GCF a few days ago, and I made this point clearly to him, that we will call for, I raised this with the US climate envoy, Mr. Kerry, who was a former Secretary of State. The same point, I've been speaking about this everywhere, that even if we raise more climate funds for the developing world, but these pools of resources sit within institutions and they cannot reach the client, then we would not have solved the problem. And so that's the third big area of negotiation. The fourth issue has to do with, in our case, payment for ecosystem services. We have argued that the other mitigation options, particularly fossil fuel for transport and burning fossil fuel for energy, these have seen massive sums, trillions of dollars flowing into renewable and the development of a non-combustion engine, engines that are used, that are now non-polluting for vehicles. But given that forests and deforestation contributes about 16 to 20% of greenhouse gases, that is land use and forestry, then you will never achieve a 1.5 degree climate target without addressing that emission source. And there is very little global money in the formal markets and even in the informal markets and from bilateral and private sources to fund the purchase of forest carbon. And that's the only way that you can decarbonize that sector. And therefore, more attention has to be paid to all three of the decarbonizing options, or the big blocks of decarbonizing options that we have. And so our argument that the world must step up and pay for the ecosystem services provided by forests. The fourth area has, maybe that's the fifth area now. Fifth area is that these, there must be some justice in this. Indigenous people in our LCDS, I heard someone saying that we're not including indigenous people enough. We're not just doing it by talk. In the LCDS, the money earned, we set aside a huge sum of money from that earned through the Norway Agreement to spend in the Amerindian communities of Guyana. Over 17 million for ICT development in the hinterland, and over 10 million US dollars for the land titling activities, a large sum, another sum of money for the Amerindian Development Fund. And we have pledged that in any future sale of forest carbon, that 15%, at least 15%, will go directly to these communities. And if we can earn $500 million per year from $500 million over the period, just imagine what 15% of 500 million would be. It would be a large sum of money, $75 million, US dollars. So these are just some of the key negotiating positions. Of course, there are other issues on the agenda that the developed world has been balking at for a long time, and some of the big developing countries. So an issue called transparency. And that is largely, we are pressing for the evolution of the agreement that is the UNFCCC document that emerges from the Conference of Parties to mandate that every country in the world must submit information on how they're meeting their pledges, and that this information must be verifiable. Like in Guyana's case, we have developed a world-class MRVS system that is monitoring, reporting, verification system in our forests to track any change in forest carbon, and we've been doing this for 10 years, we have had independent assessments. So every year we know how much of the deforestation takes place in Guyana's case, and we'll see that we have one of the lowest deforestation rates in the world, in spite of mining in Guyana, in spite of mining. And we've been tracking that using satellite technology and underground probing. So we want every country in the world to account for their pledges, and secondly, that all of the pledges on the financial side too must be accounted for. Because when we hear the developed world say, we have given 76 of the $100 billion per year now is delivered. And when we look from the developing world's perspective, how much money we receive, we have a big variance in these accounts. And so we want greater transparency. And that is a big issue being developed in COP as a block for negotiation. So for somebody to think here in Guyana that we can go and change the agenda there, what we can have is national positions which have not evolved, which has not changed over period. We had defined our positions a long time back. And these positions are aligned closely with our CARICOM partners, with a broader group and the AOSIS and SEEDS, that you can just meet any group and they can call for, 80% of the money, somebody must pay you $80 for I saw a statement issued by an NGO that we must get $80 per ton of forest carbon. You can't even, there is no market now, largely because in the Kyoto Protocol, the forest carbon was not used as an offset. And because of the many northern NGOs fought against it. And they were saying that if you allow forests to be an offset, then the developed world would take less climate action in their countries and they will buy offsets elsewhere. And our argument was, no, you should set rigid national targets and they still have to buy offsets. But a lot of those northern NGOs, they argued against it becoming part of a market-based mechanism. And as a result of it today, there's very little money for tropical forests. And so we provide a free decarbonizing option to the world, when for the other decarbonizing options, people are getting paid globally. And so I see among some of the local NGOs, it's just a repetition, an inane repetition of what the northern NGOs are calling for without understanding the nuance of the justice. Sometimes we undermine ourselves. And so when they say a fair deal for Guyana and a fair deal for the planet, they don't understand often that between the two, there are different blocks of people who are arguing for a fairer deal for the developed world at the expense of the developing world. And many of our local NGOs, they take the positions of the international community. Take oil and gas, for example. Now, under the IEA projections, they like to mention IEA said no new development of any fossil fuel related investment. And the IEA has plotted how we need to move away from fossil fuel to achieve net zero by 2050 in the energy system of the world. But under the IEA's most optimistic scenario, in 2050, you would still need 24 million barrels of oil per day in 2050, down from 100 million today. So 75% less, but you would still need 24 million barrels in 2050. So who is going to supply this? Why should we not be the ones supplying it? Of course, also utilizing carbon capture and utilization and storage, new technology for low impact extraction, a strong carbon price. You've heard us say a strong global carbon price, removal of the subsidy from production. All of these things are critical. But you'd never hear somebody say, oh, they quote the IEA report, but the IEA report still has us using 24 million barrels per day in 2015. Not 2015, 2050. So I would urge that the NGOs not to have a wholesale repetition of everything that they hear from many of those NGOs that are global, but also to understand that in Guyana, a fair deal we are there for a fair deal for Guyana, but we are aligned with a global goal of decarbonizing and achieving net zero by 2050 or even earlier. And we can do both. And that is where our negotiating position is. And this brings me to the key elements of the low carbon development strategy. As you're aware, the first LCDS, the one that we launched in 2009, which was one of the first in the world, that was based on proving the case that forests can be, an investment in forests can be a great decarbonizing option, an essential decarbonizing option, and a quick win decarbonizing option. And that many of the questions raised in northern countries about the lasting impact of this decarbonizing option, whether it's permanent or not, that those questions can be answered. So our model was built on earning money for Guyana, utilizing the money to put us onto a low carbon development trajectory, develop new low carbon services for Guyana, like the Biodiversity Center, etc., to allow invest in climate resilience and adaptation using some of those resources. So at the same time, proving some basic questions that the world was raising as issues not to proceed with this option. And that is why the model was built clearly around one, a world-class MRV system to show that you can track any change in forest carbon. Two, that we can have a broad-based consultative mechanism for the development and the management, particularly the management of the LCDS, and that is where the multi-stakeholders meeting, which was chaired by the president. I was president at that time. We had the indigenous organizations, the miners, people in the forestry sector, women, children, young people, international organizations, all on that multi-stakeholders group that met once a month. Thirdly, we had extensive consultations. We had over 300 in-person meetings. We sent text messages to people. We had the indigenous community involved. We had drafted an opt-in mechanism for them. And then we also chose an intermediary for the financing to ensure transparency. And our model became a model that was used globally to show that it could be replicated, that forest carbon could be a good, low-cost decarbonizing option, because when you look at the McKinsey cost curve at that point in time, you would have seen that carbon at $5 per ton, which we, for avoided deforestation, that we traded with Norway, carbon capture and storage, which is another decarbonizing option, even up to today, is between $150 to $250 per ton. And as you go up the scale, you would see that renewables, solar at that time was very high. Now it's coming down. So on the cost curve. So but everything was based on forest carbon and utilizing the proceeds from sale of forest carbon for mitigation, adaptation, our renewable options, including renewable energy, the Myla Fall, investing $100 million of the money in a Myla Fall, and then to prove the international model. The time has come now to evolve that into a larger strategy, which we had hoped to do before. President Granger, in a very superficial way, spoke about, oh, we stole his plan because he had mentioned the word a decade of development. He launched something called a decade of development. I don't know what it means really. I've now seen it. 2030, that would have ended in 2030. So the LCDS 2030 means we've taken the year 2030 from his plan. Now, I want to just say to the former president, a lot of documents, people have 10 years planning horizon. And if you were just to look at the LCDS in an objective way, compared to the Green State Strategy. The Green State Strategy took 5 years to develop, and it was never finalized. It involved bringing in several international organizations to work on it. They spent $1.4 million of the LCDS money. That's over 300 million Guyana dollars, $300 million of money earned from the LCDS that they had criticized when they were in opposition and they did not want to support, to develop a strategy that was never finalized. And if you look at it, it was like writing a textbook. They just came and looked at all the international best practices. It was not grounded in development. So in the last year, we have been working, less than a year, because we've been busy doing that. And I want to thank a lot of the people who have done this. This is done mainly in-house, the expanded LCDS. We had different people working on little pieces, but like on the water sector, if you look at the water sector strategy, you would see I put together a group of a few months ago, Dr. Cummins, Professor Opeder, Paulette Bino, working on those to define the issues in the water sector, and because the LCDS now is going to move into other ecosystem services. And water and in the future would be a critical issue. 80% of the world is already water stressed. They don't have enough fresh water for agricultural purposes nor drinking purposes. And you know how critical it is. It's important that in our planning process now, we include issues surrounding water. So drinking water, rainwater harvesting, watershed protection, so in the deep reaches of our countries. We have threats to freshwater resources now, saline intrusion, wastewater management. How do we manage that? Then we need water for agriculture, water for energy, hydropower. We have to deal with flood control and water management. And then, of course, a governance mechanism to see that we can integrate all of these issues. So it's a critical area for us. We have defined the work in the LCDS. We're going to get a lot of comments in. And whilst the technical work is proceeding, we've already done a lot of technical work in coming up with a strategy. We did not want to put the entire water sector strategy in the LCDS document. It will run into maybe 400 or 500 pages. But we just focus on defining some of the key areas that we are working on in the water sector so that you can get an idea as to where we're going in this regard. But the water sector strategy in itself will be 400 or 500 pages of document looking at all these areas, mapping future water resources. Just a few days ago, we're preparing for the budget now, and I had meetings with the GWI. They've come up with a plan for $118 million to take treated water along the coast for up to 90% of our people would be supplied with treated water over the next 5 years. It will take $118 million to do that. 11 treatment plants and 13 inline improvement facilities, as well as transmission mains to improve the water sector on the coast. We have a similar water sector strategy for the hinterland. So we're not just working at the broad strategic level. We're already working at the detailed planning process. I have on my desk now all of the areas, the level of water services across the country, a map for each area where the treatment plants will go, and now we are filling the gaps on financing. We have $25 million from the CDB that we are putting entirely to the water sector, so that means $93 million gap. We're looking to fill that gap now on the financing side for the budget. I'm telling you this because you know that we're not just planning, we are running parallel to the planning process by implementing. Then there are some other people who work on other elements of the strategy. I just mentioned 3. You have Dr. Finance from GGGI. You have Asha Singh, who work on the ocean governance. Dr. Asha Singh, Pradeepa Bolanath, Kevin Hogan. There are lots of other people. I hope I don't miss them. But a lot of our people in-house who have put a lot of effort in this, the Kemraj Parshram and the EPA on the biodiversity side. We've done this in-house. We didn't spend $300 million in developing this. We've done a lot of the work in-house driven by Guyanese professionals without having to spend $300 million. And the shameful thing is that the whole Green State was financed by the LCDS, that they had no part in raising the money for. And I can go through the other areas in as greater detail, like on the biodiversity side. With the expansion in this area, the Nagoya Protocol, you know, there's the UN Convention on Biodiversity, there's certain international obligations, but in Guyana's case, we're going to look at it from three perspectives. From the perspective of conservation, that means more protected areas, different layers of protection in the protected areas. We've had some work on fisheries, stock, and a whole range of stuff. Then sustainable use, so it's conservation, sustainable use, and then the ecosystem services on the biodiversity side. And of course, on the forestry side, we're going to strengthen that. On the ocean ecosystem, we have a lot to do there, again on sustainable management of our fisheries, or extensive biodiversity there in the ocean. The shipping lanes that are going to, shipping is going to be vital. How in the future we can decarbonize shipping, the ships that will come to collect our oil and gas. Coastal zone management, improvement. These are all very, very important areas. So if you look through the document, you will see the expansion into biodiversity as an ecosystem service. You will see expansion away from forests into the oceans, ensuring greater sustainable use and sovereignty over our lands, our ocean space. Our economic zone, it means exclusive economic zone. Even now we have reports of vessels that are fishing in the deep sea that we don't even know about. We're acquiring some vessels that would allow us to go to the edge of our exclusive economic zone. We've already paid for those vessels that would allow our soldiers and police to go to the edge of our exclusive economic zone, to do that, to make sure that sustainable management and exercise of sovereignty over our resources can be pursued. Then on the energy transition, another big element is the energy transition. And this is vital as an element of decarbonizing our energy system. So I think the document has clearly pointed out the way. We have mapped our demand for the next 5 years. We believe that the demand will grow maybe twofold, but we need to have our energy installation triple the install capacity. And why do we have to triple install capacity, although you'd have maybe a doubling of demand? Largely because a lot of the demand now in the current situation is met by private generation. So we assume that in the future, when the power becomes more stable and the prices are cut by half, which is our intention, by 2024, as soon as the gas to energy project comes on stream, to cut the price of electricity by 50% to business and consumers across Guyana, that a lot of the private generation capacity now would go into reserve and people will come onto the grid. So therefore, we have to cater for that too. And that is why we're planning to triple install capacity now. And how are we going to do that? In a manner that moves away from over 95% of our current demand is met from fossil fuel, and very polluting fossil fuel, bunker C, a worse polluting fossil fuel, and diesel. The first big decarbonizing option would be the gas. Now, gas is not totally renewable, but as you've seen across the world has come to the realization, because the pace of renewable is not keeping pace with the demand, that the introduction of renewable is not keeping pace with the growth of energy demand, that you need a transitional fuel, which is the gas, using gas to generate power, because gas reduces the emission by 50% from burning, say, bunker C. It's a cleaner fuel, although it is still fossil fuel. And so the big project would allow us immediately to decarbonize our energy sector by 50%. Allied with that, the $80-odd million that we had parked at the Inter-American Development Bank. Remember, this was money that should have been invested in the Myla Fall, the $100 million, but that project did not go forward. So that money is going to be used for solar, some large solar farms, and before 2024, again, those will be implemented. And then, as you are aware, the Myla project was retendered. A decision has been made by the cabinet on Thursday about the Myla project. We're hoping to move into negotiations very soon. As you know, the history of this project, because again, you're going to hear, and I made this clear, a lot of people who are calling for renewable energy, they have to understand that renewable energy initially has some impact. And so when we're developing a Myla Fall, the area, the reservoir would have to be cleared of the forest. And so I hope now they're not going to come and say, oh, you're clearing the reservoir. This was dealt with in the past. You have to clear the reservoir of the forest to keep store the water there. So all year around, even when the dry season, you have water in the storage there. Now, a lot of their work, the studies had been done, millions of US dollars of studies on the environmental issues and all of that in the past. The project was ready to go. Blackstone, which was the project developer through its subsidiary, Blackstone is a large US company, had gone out to tender. They had chosen the China Rail as the project developer, the contractor. So that's the US company had selected this. You know the history. APNO said, we're not proceeding with that. They refused to raise this debt ceiling because there was not a debt, but we had to spend about $700 million to guarantee payment for the power, because it was a power purchase agreement that we were signing. We are not putting in a cent into the project. This is, we just had a power purchase agreement. APNO killed the project. When they got into office, they asked Norway to do another study. Norway said, they did this study, and they said that a Myla Fall is still the best option. If you look at the study, please go to that study, a comprehensive study done by Norway, to say it's the best option for meeting baseload renewable energy for Ghana. That's the only way you can decarbonize, because solar, you can't use it as baseload at this point in time. When the sun doesn't shine for a few days, you don't have power in the country. So the only way to achieve the renewable targets is basically through the construction of the hydropower. And so the report from Norway said we should retender. I'm happy we did, because from the numbers I see now, it will go down back to the maximum price will be before negotiations, because will be about just over maybe 7.7 cents per kilowatt hour. In the past, in 2010, it was 10 cents per kilowatt hour. But the interest cost at that time, when LIBOR was about 8%, now LIBOR is near zero. So the interest cost was pushing up the price of power. We have a really great bid, but that price at 10 cents per kilowatt hour included the 100 million in equity that we were going to put into the project. Because equity financing was higher than the debt financing. They wanted a return of 20% on equity, and debt financing was just 7%. So we sought to buy down some of the equity in the project to get to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So now we are not going to put any money into the project. We're just buying power. And at 7.7 cents and below that, because we still need to do some negotiations, we can still sell power at 15 cents per kilowatt hour, which is what we are hoping to do, because now it's 30 cents per kilowatt hour, and still make a good profit for GPL. So this is really where we're very pleased that the bids came in and that we have these offers now, and that it is going to move forward. So again, consistent with what I said before, we're not just working at the planning level, we're also working at the implementation level. No use you say 100% renewable by 2025. You know, the President Granger liked to make all these great speeches, good life for everyone, great speeches, everybody shake your hands and move away, and then no project to implement it. We are working on the gas to energy project. We're bringing that in by 2024. We're working very hard. And we're doing all the studies. We're taking environmental, geotechnical, geophysical, all being done now. The designs are looked at, etc. We're working on a Myla, and we're moving to contracting stage so that you can start construction. And we're working on solar, and then on wind, we're starting to look at wind. This is leaving out what we are doing in Kumu, the hydro there, small hydros, Kumu, going back to Mokomoko, a 1 megawatt unit for Bartika, for Leg 1, Wakana, the isolated systems, Madia, all of these. These are separate. This is separate from the 30,000 units that we'll put on each home in the hinterland and riverine communities. That's separate. That's the off-grid systems. So we're working, those are plans we're implementing now. We're not just talking about strategy anymore. Strategies don't deliver benefits to your people. And our job is, we promise this, to cut electricity price to make it more stable. We have a problem now with the grid, and so we're now doing a study, so by next year we can have an overall improvement of the grid, so that when all of this power comes in from Myla, and this is power delivered from the contractor at 7.7 cents or less, coming into Georgetown, delivered to us here. So we have to then, that includes the transmission. And then the 250 megawatts, bringing it from over Wales, because you have to cross the river, bring some here, distribute it. Now when we have all of this new power, that the grid can handle it, it's stable, that we don't have all these blackouts, etc., change out of all the transformers, stable grid across the country. That's the next big thing we're working on a stable, smart grid. That we're, because fiber will be on all the electricity lines that you can sit in a control room and know without having to send a crew out and get a report when there is a power outage any part of this country. That's the next phase that we're working on now, and the study is currently being done for us to explore the smart grid. And the smart grid in itself, if it's done well, can help to reduce the transmission and the commercial losses. But transmission losses mean less carbon too, because less power you have to produce. So that in itself is a decarbonizing option. You know, just resealing some of the existing transmission lines can cut the losses significantly. So we're exploring that too. That's on the energy side. So as you can see, we already have several projects in each of these areas. On low carbon transport, again, we'd have to find a way. The world is now, the target is to try to move away from combustion engines by 2035, etc. So that means vehicles that are not powered by gas, vehicles that are powered either by electricity, batteries, or hydrogen fuel cells, but more so batteries. To get to that, it's a big challenge, because you can't just say one night stop importing these vehicles. You have to put in place an infrastructure to service the sector. So instead of gas stations, you have to have charging points throughout the country that people can go and charge their cars and their batteries at. And they must be able to charge, not to take 2 hours to charge a battery, but powerful enough to charge a vehicle in a few minutes. And several of those. So how do you, it's a lot of infrastructure you have to build out to be able to achieve something like that. And then the price of electricity too will matter, because if it's 30 cents per kilowatt hour as it is now, and people have to charge up at 30 cents per kilowatt hour, means they have to pay higher prices to charge. So you have to be able to navigate this future well, and to see how we make transitions that are not burdensome to our people. We cannot jump to the developed world targets immediately. Although now, at this point in time, for people who want to import vehicles that are powered by renewable energy, we can give them the incentives to do so. So basically they're on their own. They don't have the public infrastructure to support this. They'd have to charge at home. So it is something you have to think through carefully. We're not going to make a pledge 100% by 2030 and then put pressure on all of our people. They can't even charge up their vehicles. They can't import vehicles. It will affect people's lives. And we have to do it in a way that is careful. But we are committed to starting working slowly over time to get that done. Of course, digital infrastructure. And that is key in a low carbon economy. Not just for job creation of a low carbon impact type, but also to allow you to run a lot of the low carbon systems and sectors. And this is a crucial area. That is why our insistence now on building out a grid, privately funded, and support for it by getting rid of the monopoly certain sectors have, control of the spectrum. You've seen us taking charge more over the spectrum. Companies would have to pay for the spectrums so that we can have a world-class world-class system that all of our people, whether they live in the hinterland or along the coast, they can have access to a world-class digital system and infrastructure that would allow them to access services and improve their lives, basically have a better quality of life, but it allow the government to deliver on its own services faster, which is e-education, e-health, e-security, all of these things, improving security across the country. It's vital, based on what we are looking at the security sector, how we evolve into using more high-tech means of solving crime, detecting crime, preventing crime. You know, software use, cameras, tracking systems, all of this, without, of course, violating the privacy of our people. These are narrow margins. So this is the planning that we're conducting now for the future. All of these are linked to the future of Guyana. And then, of course, the oil and gas sector. So you see, I mentioned before that we have to develop this sector. Even in 2050, there will be demand for fossil fuel. The prices might be a bit lower, but we are arguing that we support. That's why the President mentioned clearly we support, and he's going to mention it in his speech today, later at COP, that although we are a producer, we support a strong global carbon price. If you have a strong carbon price that factors in the externalities of the carbon, or CO2, and its impact on the climate, then it gives a greater incentive to the faster introduction of renewable energy. So although the IEA spoke about peak oil by 2025, and then declining from 100 million barrels a day to 25 million, 24 million by 2050, they also said that the pace of that change is determined by the users too. So if the energy demand is growing in some parts of the world, and energy demand will grow, if you look at what the IEA said, a lot of countries don't even have electricity to their people. In India, in many parts of Africa, you have tens, hundreds of millions of people who don't have access to electricity. They have to get access to electricity. It wouldn't be a fair world too if they don't have. So demand will grow there. And then if you're pushing only to shut down the fossil fuel industry by saying no new development, and the demand is growing, then you need something to fill the gap. And they're saying that unless you go up to, you need $4 trillion spent by 2030 on renewable energy to fill that gap. So it means a threefold increase in financing for renewable energy, because if the demand is growing, supplies are dwindling because you're saying you can't produce more here. You have a cap now at peak oil. Something has to fill it. And right now, you don't have enough investment in renewable to fill the gap. So what will happen? Prices will skyrocket. And this is what has happened in Europe. The gas price for gas tripled in the US, and people are balking. They say, let's go back to fossil fuel. England, where in the UK, where they're hosting COP now, they've just opened up some new coal-fired power plants, although one of the objectives of COP is to bury coal, the death knell for coal. So it has to be careful here, carefully planned. And if we don't develop our resources, like some of our people say, don't develop it because they repeat what the northern NGOs say, then you're giving a monopoly only to the existing producers, which is unfair. Because how do you want a fair deal for Guyana when you want us to park our oil and gas sector, but for the next 30 years, what will happen? The world will be producing 100 million barrels per day, and then gradually go down to 24 million barrels a day by 2050. But we must save it. Let the rest of the world produce it, but Guyana must not touch it, the resources. And therefore, our objective has to be to try to get as much out as possible from the sector as quickly as possible, and then invest this in the sectors, low carbon sectors of the future. Our people's education, healthcare. We're currently in the planning process to do several major regional hospitals, six of them to do Children Maternal Hospital, rework the Georgetown Hospital. We're looking at some big private investments, hundreds of millions of dollars in healthcare. I don't want to get into all the projects because you'll hear more about this. We're already started planning for the budget. We're hoping to have an early budget next year. But you will see an entire plan laid out for health sector improvement management, and really rapidly. We're planning and implementing at the same time like we're doing the other sectors. So this is our argument, the core of our argument. How do we take the resources here and spending it on creating the infrastructure plus the human resources development that could, and invest in the non-oil economy that would allow longevity and sustainability for our economy and our people. That's the key objective here. Now, consistent with this, you know, I was in Ghana, and I want to thank the President, Vice President, Minister of Finance, everyone that I met there. The experience, I spent 2.5 days there, intense meetings, and the experience was a very, very positive one. I was exposed to some of the highest quality personnel that you'd find anywhere in the world. Smart people who have managed their system extraordinarily well. And you would hear all kinds of assessments of Ghana from people who don't know better. So we are going to utilize the skills of the people from Ghana to assist us in creating the architecture for the management of the industry. We've had a lot of consultants from northern countries and elsewhere, but it's time we go to a country that has actually had to work at building these institutions from scratch in a relatively short period of time. And they have, I tell you, enormous experience at doing so. So tonight, Deputy Minister of Energy will be leading, from Ghana, will be leading a team that would include the CEO of the Petroleum Commission and the Director of Local Content from the Petroleum Commission. They will be coming in tonight, as well as the CEO and another technical person from the Ghana National Gas Company. I have asked in the short term, we need their skills in 3 areas as we move, hopefully before the end of the year, to table our local content policy. So our local content policy has been in the public domain for a very long time, almost a year. We are wrapping it up now, and we are looking at key issues. We're honing down on the definition of what a local company would mean. Like in Ghana's case, it's 51% ownership by a Ghanaian person, 80% of management, and 100% of unskilled labor. That's how they define a local company. It's very attractive from what I see. They have worked through a schedule. So I've seen here a lot of our people put down several things, and some are totally unrealistic. You shut down the industry if you go into those. But there are some areas we've made it clear from before that are 100% carve out for Guyanese. Let me repeat them. Rentals of properties. So for households and for offices, etc., would be 100% Guyanese companies. That in itself over the next year can allow hundreds of millions of US dollars into our economy and into our people's pocket, considering you may need about 5,000 of these units. And you know, it's between 3,000 to 5,000 US dollars per unit. That's an opportunity for Guyanese. Transportation, 100%. So all of the, I see companies here coming in from abroad to do transportation. Local logistics, 100%. Security companies, 100%. Others like maid services and all of those services, 100%. Food supplies, we can produce that. These alone would create, leaving out the fabrication, which we'd have to work on, and engineering services to see that we have realistic goals there, because we're still putting together the skills and stuff in these areas, and you can't slow down the industry. But these are critical areas for us that by law would allow much, much more to flow. We're looking to train, set up a national, early next year we'll start building out a national training institute that hopefully will train over 1,000 persons per year. We're looking to train now maybe 600 to 700 welders in a short-term certification program. This is not just putting in place the framework, putting in place a mechanism to ensure that the companies comply with their obligation, but also training people to make sure they can access the opportunities. Because if you don't do that, they would not be able to. This will drive, I'm very pleased that the development, since we're in office, we have now 3 companies, I think, that are bidding for the future shore-based possibilities. And all 3 are Guyanese. All 3 are Guyanese for the shore-based facilities. This is unheard of. And this would run, to produce one of those would run into hundreds of millions of dollars. Our own people are doing this. So we're hoping that when the team leaves, that another technical team will come, maybe around the 4th or so, to join this team. Some will have to leave from Ghana, that will work with our staff in the Ministry of Natural Resources and other agencies, with the legal people, to look at the local content policy, give us there a second opinion. Secondly, the CEO of Ghana Gas we'd show him what's going on at Wales. We'd give him a detailed presentation. We'll be able to benefit from his enormous expertise in giving us, because Ghana Gas manages a pipeline. They built and they're managing a pipeline. And so we'd be able to get second opinions. But let's make it clear that every expenditure, when people talk about 900 million, a billion, 600 million, every single expenditure on this project will have to go through a bidding process. So we have made that clear with Exxon, because this is a joint development, and we are part of ensuring that the contractors that they're selected through that nobody is excluded from it. So that the final expenditure the market will determine this. Now, it's a bad time to be bidding many things because of what has happened globally. Steel prices have gone up very high and stuff. It's a bad time, but we can't slow down the development of these projects and wait for better days to come. When the supply chains globally have improved and the production facilities that were mothballed for COVID, they're reopened. We have to proceed. So we'll have that. And then on the Natural Resources Fund, we plan to make some amendments there that can operationalize this fund, where we can then practically be very transparent. We have a complex fiscal formula that they're using in this Natural Resources Fund that the Minister of Finance can manipulate, and that the citizens would never know. It's too intricate to allow even a technical person to understand the calculations, much less ordinary citizens. Ordinary citizens must know how much money we've collected from the oil companies. So to do that, we will fulfill our manifesto promise in the Natural Resources Fund legislation amendment when we go, hopefully before the end of the year, to criminalize non-disclosure of the money received from the oil companies. So the Minister of Finance can go to jail for 10 years if he doesn't notify Parliament and publish in the official gazette 3 months after receiving any money. Had we had that, Jordan would have been in jail. And I see Jordan talking a lot today now about probity and tax matters and stuff. SOCU has just been a disappointment, because had it been the PPP, they would have probably been running us down. We left it at a technical level, but Winston Jordan has been breach of our financial regulations and also his fiduciary responsibility when he transferred large tracts of land worth billions of Guyana dollars to individuals without them paying a cent, although the agreement said they had to pay for these properties. You can go to jail for that. That's a breach of the financial laws. I don't see him even charged by now. And I wonder what's going on. And everybody knows this. The media could easily find out which of those properties are. Just ask Nissel. We can list the ones that he passed title to, unencumbered titles to, leaving out the fact that he got GRA to sell two of his kids' vehicles for less than 300,000 Guyana dollars each. There are lots of things. I see them coming out back, Patterson and all these guys talking about gas to energy project. And I don't pay attention to them, but it's because of the PPP not focusing too much that maybe they're getting a little bit, they think the country has forgotten the massive corruption that took place in that era, because we have not held them responsible enough. And I'm going to start paying attention. I talked to the Attorney General to find out what's going on with these cases now, because we just been focusing and we didn't want to look at it politically. We let it go to the technical agencies, but we have to actually find out what's going on with a lot of these cases where you have had a large-scale theft of government resources. without any accountability. This is this is important for Ghana. Then we're hoping to get, we already have someone in Ghana working on the Natural Resources Fund legislation. I told you about that amendment that will be there. And that's one amendment, and then a simple formula that every Guyanese can understand of how much comes to the budget, how much is saved, etc. Everybody. We want a layman to know how much money you collect so they can go to the official gazette once a year or the ministry website or the parliamentary website and know how much money and then how much has come to the budget. And then through the budgetary process, the Minister of Finance must take to Parliament and say, this is how we are utilizing the money, so you can have a debate in Parliament. Simple, transparent process. Very, very simple, transparent, understandable to every Guyanese. It's when you try to utilize these complex formulas like the fiscally sustainable amount and all of that nonsense that you then have trouble, because it leaves room for manipulation. And that is why when we're in opposition, I thought about the overwhelming dominance of the Ministry of Finance and in a very discretionary way over in the Natural Resources Fund, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the need to simplify and distance yourself from it. That is the politicians a bit more from the processes. So that's what we're working on. Hopefully before the end of the year, that will be tabled too. This brings me into the other issues. I notice on the oil and gas sector, let me just quickly, there have been lots of comments in the public domain about that industry itself. And so we're hoping that latest next year, third quarter, that we will be able to auction the new blocks. That requires us now to aggressively enforce the relinquishment provisions in all of the contracts so that added to the existing pool of areas available, we will have now the relinquished areas which can then form part of the auction that will take place latest third quarter next year. This is critical for us. We have been caught up with now the trying to put in place the architecture for the management of the industry, but we need to now move to the next stage, which is enforcement and then auctioning. Enforcement of the relinquishment provision and auctioning. We have been very disappointed that we have not been able to select a group to do the audit of the post-2017 expenditure by Exxon. The reason is that we did not have a strong local content. So we had two local groups that came in, but they were not strong enough. We want to build a capacity in Guyana to do this audit. We think our people have enormous skills, forensic skills and auditing skills, and we're looking to see if we can't have an arrangement where we have a consortium of local people come together to do part of this work, partnering with a foreign company, so we can build capacity right here in Guyana. We're disappointed that from the individual bids we've had, we have not been able to do this. So when I get back from Scotland, I've asked the minister to see if we can get together all of the groups in Guyana who've expressed interest in this to see how we can partner. They can partner with a foreign company to do this audit. We badly need to build this capacity also in GRA. GRA has been mandated to try to build a capacity to do this. But it's a disappointment because it's been quite a while. I've seen the issue about the waivers of, and a big hullabaloo made about waivers of the environmental impact assessment for exploration in the oil and gas sector. And I suggest that you should look at the process. So this is, in spite of the waiver, this is what a standard permit looks like. And I will share it with you and have somebody put this online. And you will see the obligations. It's 24 pages, and you would see the obligations to ensure issues like spill and a whole range of other things. So they have had, not, although there is a waiver, they still have to produce of a full-fledged environmental impact assessment for the exploration. When you come to development, you have to do an EIA, a full-fledged EIA. But the waiver has been given for an EIA for exploration, but the companies have to produce an environmental assessment and management plan, an EA and MP plan, in which a lot of information has to be supplied to the EPA. And this is for the generalized area in which they're doing exploration. And before they start drilling, they have to go into the EPA to hone down on the details. The permit is issued, but the permit has a ton of obligations that include issues that they have to, information shared, but impact on maritime life and on spills or anything, leakage, what they have to do, and notification, etc. Now, I see Mr. Adams has been talking a lot about how we are weakening now the EPA, or the provisions of the EPA. Mr. Adams himself gave 25 of those waivers, 25 wells that were drilled, 25 waivers. And I'm wondering now, from 2015 to 2025, 2021, we have had so many exploration wells done. Every one, not a single environmental impact assessment has been done for anyone on the exploration side. All have been given waivers. And so the same people who are writing now saying they should have a full EIA, where were they in the last 6 years when Vincent Adams, 25 waivers were given? It is very convenient, very, very convenient. Where were they when all of these waivers were given? 6 years now. Suddenly, they want a full EIA. But in spite of the fact that there is a waiver of the EIA, please have a look at this, and you would see how detailed it is, the permit is. And a lot of people speak, the public is, these groups create the impression that, oh, it's a free-for-all. It is not for a free-for-all. The EPA has to improve on one issue, however. They have to explain to the public when they post the reasons for giving they have to post the reasons for the waiver of the full environmental impact assessment. And I hope going forward, they will do this. They should publish the reasons. So when you see the bridge, you will see what is required next, that you have different stages. So you can have a EIA, a full-fledged environmental impact assessment. You can have an environmental assessment and management plan, or you can have none of the two. And so it doesn't mean if you don't have the EIA that it's a free-for-all. But if they waive the EIA, then they must explain why. And it should be in the public document that they publish. It has to be for transparency reasons. As you know, we're constantly seeking to improve the permits, and so we've already, in the one that we're looking for the Yellowtail project, we're looking for a generic position where the parent company, Exxon, will now guarantee up to we're looking at maybe up to $2 billion of any damage caused here in Guyana, because from the beginning, there was no parent company guarantee. It was implicit, they said. So we are looking at it, and it has to grow. This would have to grow. But it is now getting them to acknowledge that there is that link between the two. That's crucial for us as we move forward. The next issue I've seen on the political issue in Ghana, I just wanted to mention one thing, that sometimes it's very hard to operate with an opposition that is very convenient. It is now when that doesn't bother me very much. That doesn't bother me very much, because I recognize that their APNU, the PNC, has been based on convenience a long time. But what is even more difficult is when they operate with the same level of bravado, confidence, without the knowledge that, the technical knowledge that they are wrong. And that bothers me. So from Amanza Walton coming and bullying the consultation to make her prepared remarks and then leaving, no intention to understand the technical issues, to a recent comment about my radio interview in Ghana. The person who was interviewing me asked me about the overheating of the economy in the future years, because this is something that happens when you have a great influx of resources, and it happened in many oil and gas related jurisdictions. So I thought, frankly speaking, that she was trying to get me to look at more, she meant more about the Dutch disease. Because the overheating, but I dealt with both issues. So the overheating takes place when your demand outstrips your productive capacity. So you meet a peak to meet in terms of productive capacity to meet demand. And then what happens is, if the prices go up, it overheats the economy. Your prices naturally go up. So for example, if the demand for skilled labor or for housing, now, if you have a big construction boom and the demand for skilled labor, or any labor for that matter, because of the construction boom goes up, but you only have limited workers and limited carpenters, what will happen? They would charge more. The carpenters would want more money. They would naturally want more money because they're scarce supply now. They have a greater bargaining power. So it pushes up inflation, overheating of the economy. So I said to her, it is a concern of ours. But the one way that in the future, when we get to that, when we reach full employment here, that could be a possibility that we may have to consider immigration, bringing people into work because we have reached full employment in Guyana. All of our people are employed. So if you get more labor, then you can also import more capital and expertise. You have greater capacity to meet growing local demand. And that is one way, theoretically, how you can prevent overheating. This is pure economics, and it's the way you can approach this. But I was talking about full employment and in the future. Now, the APNU went, and then I dealt also on the Dutch disease, how we plan to invest in the non-oil economy to prevent that from happening, and careful management of the resources so we don't change relative prices. So locally, I saw APNU saying Jagdeo wants to displace Guyanese workers by bringing in foreigners. And Harman went on the West Coast and said, I am bringing in people from Asia. It was really basically Indians he meant. Now I will go in Ghana to tell the Ghanaians that I'm going to bring people from India. But it's the racism that they can't get out of, the bottom house racism. Can't get out of that racism. So it's not absolutely not true. I spoke about full employment. I was speaking about a theoretical construct, how you avoid the issue of overheating in an economy, and how you have to bolster your productive capacity, or else it affects everyone. And in the future, many countries have done this. They keep replenishing their productive capacity by allowing immigrants, but that's not a now thing. We got to get all our people working first. So a simple thing like that. But I think they were a bit aggrieved. They didn't mention any word because, you know, I saw them very upset that I went to lay a wreath by Nkrumah. Everybody, especially the young people in this country, must know what Nkrumah meant to the world at that time that was struggling to be independent. He was a source of inspiration to many persons, including people here and the party, the People's Progressive Party, which held him in very high regard. And so after they split in 1955 in the party, Dr. Jagan, he invited both Dr. Jagan and Burnham to convene a meeting in New York to try to see if they couldn't engage the two sides. And the foreign minister got the Commonwealth to send someone down to Guyana who was also confident of Nkrumah. The Commonwealth came here, they had a huge meeting with both sides for several days, and they reached an agreement. That is the reunification back of the party that was split. And then the team left, and then Burnham repudiated the agreement. So she was asking me that the split in 1955 in the PPP, that it took place on a racial basis. And I said to her, no, that's not true, because it had to do more. Burnham wanted more leadership position. And if you look at the people who left with Burnham, you had several Indo-Guyanese leaders in the PPP who left with Burnham, and several Afro-Guyanese leaders, including UC Quayana, who stayed with Chetty Jagan. It was not a split along racial lines in 1955. But the reason the party could not come together and unified and prevent the problems of the 60s was largely two factors. One was that the Kennedy and the others had made it clear to the UK that the PPP should not lead Guyana to independence, because Chetty Jagan he had a very strong nationalistic agenda, and they thought that Guyana might become the second Cuba in the hemisphere. And that was one of the reasons why they destabilized the country, so as to prevent that happening, and two, why they got Venezuela to reopen the border case. That was the first reason. And the second one could be found in the source documents for the Committee 303. If you go online now and type in Committee 303 Guyana, you will see that the CIA had had many covert operations around the world with a lot of fallout. And the United States then set up a group called the 303 Committee to manage the covert operations of the CIA from 1964, and it was disbanded in 1970. So in 1969, based on the minutes released now from that committee, which is readily available to all Guyanese, Burnham, who had already been the Prime Minister of Guyana, because in 1966 we became independent, applied to the CIA for $10,000 a month. He asked them for $10,000, and the committee met in 1969, and they gave him $5,000 a month. And they said he had already been receiving funding for a very long period. And this funding lasted until after Guyana became a republic and Burnham became president. I think it went up to 1971. So if he was receiving money from the CIA, which we know now, they couldn't reach an agreement to unify the parties back, because the whole objective was destabilization and not having Chetty as part of the equation. And you can easily go and read this yourself. Just read it yourself, go online and look at it. Check this 303 committee and what it was set up for. It was to run CIA covert operations around the world. And so Guyanese need to know our history too, but they didn't say anything about that. Because imagine a sitting president receiving money from the CIA. And we haven't come to grips with that period in our history, the period that generated enough problems. And that is what it was the basis for the division of our people. The strifes that were fomented in that period that were externally driven, aided by many people here. And I think we need to come to grips with that if we want to really move forward. And that is what I was talking about in the interview. But you notice they didn't say much about that, because they can easily go and check it. Any Guyanese could easily check this. I'm not going to go on much longer, because I see now the big struggle. And imagine when we say APNU and PNC is racist, people say, oh, It's not true. Well, the leaders themselves have been accusing each other of racism. They themselves have been saying who is more racist than the other against Indo-Guyanese. So it is now the whole thing. And imagine when we said that APNU has mediocre MPs who were put there for their thuggery, not the least, well, maybe the least, Sherrod Duncan and the others, who their only reason for being in Parliament is because they can pursue thuggery and support Harman. Well, and they're mediocre. You don't need to go very far. Now Norton is accusing them of the same thing, that many of these MPs are either were bullied or are there because of the thuggery. That's why they're supporting Harman. Anyway, in any case, I see from all the leaders, it's a generation from the past that's contesting. Among all of the contestants, they're still in the 1970s generation, still there. So whoever wins, there will be not much excitement about transformation in that party. That go back to the age-old issue of trying to rig the elections. I've made it clear we are prepared to engage, and I saw a few things about misrepresentation of the president's position even now. Well, the president was very clear from the beginning. So I saw that letter by Schuman, which was superfluous. It didn't necessarily have to come, because the president was very clear from the beginning. It is the issues that about talking about a governance model that we had put in place in our manifesto. That is where he's not going to engage on. That on constitutional matters, those are standard. You have to fulfill your constitutional obligations. So I'm glad that that finally has been put to rest, but because somehow there was the mistaken impression that that was the position. I think the president mentioned too about the Representation of People Act, and that's going to be in the public domain for consultations for a period before it goes to Parliament for debate. Thank you.
Mr. Jagdeo, good day. Kurt Campbell from the newsroom. My first question is one of clarity. You mentioned that there are some local recommendations for the finalized local content policy that, if implemented, could shut down the industry. I just wanted some clarity on what those recommendations are. Also, can you say if Guyana will be marketing its carbon credits after the LCDS is finalized? And can you name some of the countries that have submitted their bids for the Myla Falls, and some
sure.
clarity on the discussions going forward?
Sure. On the last one, I think the award, Ministry of Finance, hasn't been notified as yet. It's not in the public domain. So what would happen is that I'd ask the ministry to put out a full statement. So you'd see on that and the bridge too, both have been awarded. So you will see a statement from the Ministry of Finance.
You don't know how soon?
By today or maybe tomorrow latest. So they will deal with those issues. I saw somewhere they said that a company had withdrawn Buscales, because for the bridge there were 5 companies that tendered, but they didn't withdraw. They just, from what I gather, had submitted a bid for a tunnel instead of a bridge. So that was the issue. But I'd ask the Ministry of Finance on both issues there. We will, yes, we're now, no company has submitted any bidders yet. We're going through the process, the art process, the leaf process. We'll work with them. They would have to make offers. I'll be meeting with the emergent group that will be marketing our carbon. And you know, the marketing arrangement has an upside to us too, because although it gets underwritten at $10 per ton, if it's sold for higher, we still get the higher price, of course deducting admin costs. And the US, I think UK and Norway endorsed this group. They're putting some money into it. So we are hoping over the next 4 months or so, we will be looking to finalize all of these arrangements. So, and work the market, see all of the people who are interested, and then we will probably get the proposals through emergent. But whatever we put in, it is going to be underwritten at $10 per ton. So that's a floor price. Under the Norwegian agreement, it was $5 per ton. So the floor price, anything we put on the market, will be $10 per ton. Now, that has to be underwritten. That's like money in the bank for us. They have to guarantee us that. And then try to sell it at a higher price, which we believe can be done. And if they sell it at a higher price, since it's a not-for-profit organization, we will get the benefit of the higher price too. So there's an upside to that. We have not, we have not received any offer, and I doubt we'll finalize anything before end February. And what was the first?
It was the recommendations and the local content.
Oh, the local content. Let me don't get into details. I have to sit down with the private sector. But to start, like engineering services at 20%. That's the start date, like 3 months after you have to implement engineering services. Okay, we don't have people who can engineer FPSOs and stuff like that. It has to grow over time. Like we have a paucity of engineers who have designed any of these things. You can't look at compromising quality in that regard. I just give you one example.
Mr. Jagdeo, good afternoon. Dennis Shabral, Damarawi's News Talk Radio. Sir, could you say what laws or regulations have to be put in place to allow for the auction of the oil blocks? And what is the rationale for seeking a guarantee specifically for Yellowtail? And quickly, sir, with respect to borrowing from China, could you say if indeed there are plans to do so on a large scale, and what amount you're looking at, and why? And how in terms of China and borrowing, and in that context, how do you address concerns by the United States that, you know, Chinese companies may not be the best fit as far as infrastructural projects are concerned? I'm sure you're aware of those concerns.
So the first one was rationale for
the rationale,
guarantee.
Yes.
And then the third, after the Chinese borrowing?
The Yellowtail?
Oh, Yellowtail.
Uh-huh.
No.
Yellowtail.
And then
the guarantee.
The guarantee, yes.
Yes.
The guarantee for Yellowtail, and then there was a third issue that you'd raise.
The auction.
Oh, the auction.
Yes.
Law and auction, yeah. So, to go to an auction, we'd have to make, first of all, several policy decisions. So we'll have to get somebody in who has done auctions before. We'd have to get technical help. Secondly, we have to make a decision, like some countries are doing, whether they want to invest, like Suriname is doing, to shoot 3G seismic and then auction the blocks with the seismic data, which gives you a higher price. Or to avoid that, just auction the areas as is where is. So that policy decision has to be made. And then if we decide to do this seismic, who is going to fund it? Because that means government will have to fund that. What's the cost, etc. Thirdly, whether we preclude the existing people from buying into this. So say we prohibit an Exxon from buying into the auction. We have to make that also a policy position. And then, of course, making sure that we have gathered all the areas based on as per contract that would be relinquished. So there's several issues. That is why I said third quarter of next year. Third quarter. It gives us almost a year to do all of that. And then when we can go out to the auction.
Any laws or regulations will have to be amended?
If there is, then definitely. Definitely. Definitely we'll have to look at a framework for doing the auction too. On the rationale for the insurance, this has been a long-standing issue in the private domain, and one of the criticisms of the contract that somehow that a parent company, because this company is locally incorporated, and should you have a spill or anything of that nature, that there would not be a specific guarantee from the parent company to the local company. There's no specific guarantee. And so this is trying to nibble away at all of the issues that we have had problems with. So you know, on the agreement itself, the 2016 PSA, we have several issues with that, and we're working hopefully to address those issues in a model PSA. And then on the environmental side, the concerns have been raised over flaring. Imagine, I saw Vincent Adams said they had a no flaring policy. He had no fine for no flaring. It's a total lie. But we have had to look at wastewater management, no flaring, cradle to grave management of the waste. Now the next thing is that the next frontier in that, from cradle to grave management of waste, is what will happen on our dump sites. Because already waste from the oil companies, you know, they might overload our dump sites. So how do we address that policy-wise? Those are some of the issues that we have to go into in the next round, in the next iteration. And now the insurance. So one by one, we're chipping away at all the safeguards to ensure that each progressive permit will have enhanced conditions, and then the earlier conditions from the other permits then get morphed into the most recent one. There are lots of other areas, even inspection. You know, we've managed to secure $2 million from Exxon to pay for our inspection now, safety inspections, as part of the last, the approval of the Payara license. In Ghana, I looked at the monitoring of what is happening offshore. Because right now we take the data from Exxon, but we'd have to have possibly people on the FPSO as well as a remote system to measure and report, you know, through the satellite or through the fiber optic cable when it comes in, that will go into our control room that the government would build. So we can on a daily basis track the flow of oil. If they say 30 barrels of oil is being produced that day, it's actually 30, and that the wastewater, we can track wastewater and stuff. There is a Guyanese company in Canada, but there are some others in Ghana, and when we go to bid, hopefully we'll get others But this is something that local people can do. I've visited a control center in Ghana where they're tracking gas. And it's not a big facility. It's half of here, a few Ghanaian, and they're huge screens, and they track everything on a daily basis. I think we can do that too, to make sure that our own people can verify what they're actually saying. On the other issue with China and borrowing, so if a Myla fall, now we are not going to borrow any money for a Myla fall. So I saw in the newspaper it says that, oh, we're going to borrow for a Myla Falls. So we are buying power. So all the risks are with the investor now. They have the hydrology risk and all the financing risks and everything else. We're just buying power. You supply power to us, we pay for the power at a price. You take all the other risks. Of course, we'd have oversight over the project, but they have to raise the money and everything else. So that's not coming on our debt as government debt, okay? Because we're not borrowing to do that. That's one. Two, we have looked at the financing, and so we made it clear to everyone, no financing from anybody comes with political strings. But Chinese financing has been readily available to the world, and we believe, like the rest of the region, we have to explore friends and partners from every part of the world. So we try to get financing from some other sources, and Austria for the hospital, their children and maternal hospital, and the upfront fee. So if we have to borrow just around 100 million euros from Austria, about 103 million euros, we have to deduct $13 million euros immediately and pay that back as a fee, upfront fee. And then there's an interest rate. And we have to use one of their contractors too. So that's a Western country financing for model. The UK has just also guaranteed that, but because we're classified by the OECD, we're not, we don't have a credit rating. We're classified as 6 by the OECD. We also have this massive, I think it's 15% upfront financing. So you get a loan and 100 million, and you have to take 15 million right away and pay it back to the companies, and then an interest rate, and use pre-approved contractors. So none of the tied financing from any part of the world come they all come with ties. If you use the US Exim financing or so, it's US companies too you have to use. And we have seen that everywhere. The Indian company, the road, I know we tendered recently for the bypass, and unfortunately none of the pre-qualified contractors submitted a bid, maybe because of COVID. So we have to re-engage the process. We are hoping to start the bypass before the end of the year. Now that's delaying a lot of our development along the route, the hospitals, the hotels, etc. So we'll probably do a one-lane access road and then later work on to give access to those people to the property not to develop it. We have started a 4-lane road to Eccles under this government using budgetary resources. On the 15th of November, we are opening the bid for the piece between Eccles to Diamond. And hopefully before the end of the year, we can award contracts for that road. By end next year, early 2023, we should have a 4-lane road to Diamond coming from Mandela. And then this would be another 4 going around to merge with the bridge. So 12 lanes coming in from the East Bank. But that will be done before the end of the year. We are now looking at Berbice for the next budget to look at New Amsterdam to Crabwood Creek, extending the road by 8 feet, 4 feet on both sides, repaving it, because you badly need that in that area. We're looking at a 4-lane, but it would require a lot of acquisition. There are lots of things in the planning stage. I don't want to talk too much about that now. But there are lots of financing needs that we need for the hospitals, etc., that we will explore every source of financing for, once it's done transparently. And we have tendered, we've seen the bids. Everybody had a chance to tender for the hydro and for the bridge. Whoever comes in, we will work with the best offer that we have. We have to build the bridge. We have to build the hydro. We went through an open process. That is what we committed to. We're committing to open processes. American companies can bid, British companies can bid, Austrian companies, Chinese companies, and that's it. On the CDB British Finance Project, the Chinese companies would be allowed to bid too on the Mabura to Linden Road, because they're part of the Caribbean Development Bank. So but it was a little misleading in the newspapers that we're borrowing for the hydro. We're not borrowing for the hydro.
How much money are you borrowing from China?
We have not decided on the projects as yet, but so to tell you a figure now, it is it would be a bit premature. I've seen somewhere that, I think it was a Stabroek News article, that they said some source said that it's 1.5 billion. I saw that. But that's true once we wrote a letter. So it's not a source. There is a letter that went to say access, but that was from Exim, and the China Development Bank, which is on commercial terms, as well as Exim Bank, which is on concessional terms. But that's access, that's not actual borrowing. You remember when Jordan said we had 900 million access to the Islamic Development Bank? Well, we spoke with the president of the Islamic Development Bank. He doesn't know what Jordan is talking about.
Mr. Jagdeo, as I have the mic, could you quickly tell us, average layman wants to know, average ordinary Guyanese man and woman, when will they begin to feel the positive effects of our oil earnings? That is to say, improvement in their purchasing power. And quickly, sir, any thoughts on why the People's Progressive Party sought to acquire arms from Czechoslovakia during the earlier period in the 50s or 60s?
When was this? I didn't even know that. So it's not a PPP. When was this?
It was around the 50s, 60s. I think there is some recent archival material that bore us out. You got vehicles.
Okay, all right. So yes, but you can bring it to my attention. I'll try to find out. But yeah. So let's look at it. Let's look at it. I thought it was recently, so I was just going to say I don't know anything about that. But let me look at it. Yes, the purchasing power of Guyanese. We have made it clear at the beginning. If you look at our manifesto, that we are in favor of investing our resources to generate jobs in the non-oil sector. Jobs are critical for us. We've had a minimum of, we thought it was 30,000 people. It's upwards of 40,000 people who lost their jobs on the APNO in those 5 years, leaving out the COVID period. When COVID came on, the whole country was shut down for the 6 months. A lot of people couldn't work. We had to start that back. At least people are working now. We had thousands of people working even on the homes that we're building now, the government homes. Upwards of 4,000, I was told. These are only in the government, the young professional homes, the low-income homes and stuff. So the first thing is to use the oil and gas resources to support expansion of economic opportunities. Secondly, world-class education. Thirdly, world-class health care. Fourth, infrastructure for the future. These 4-lane roads, cheap power, good ports, so our people, good security, so our people can drive in comfort. They can live in comfort. They have modern infrastructure. The country changes. They can traverse, from the airport to Georgetown in 20 minutes. That's important for quality of life issues too. Then we put in place targeted subsidies. So although we haven't touched the oil resources as yet, but we've already started funding targeted subsidies. Someone said to me, you all shouldn't say that you're financing this elsewhere. Why not people like in Guyana to hear they're getting oil money? So the children money, you should say it's coming from oil and the pension. And then they'll be happy. And I said, no, but hold on a while. We can't just go for popular positions. So we already moved from zero, what APNU took away to the children, to $15,000 per child per year. In the next budget, that's going to go even higher, significantly higher. And for pensions too. All of these, without even touching that, we want in the first round to utilize a lot of this money for infrastructure improvement. Georgetown, we have to spend a ton of the oil money in Georgetown too. Infrastructure, drains, preventing flooding, having good roads, modernizing the city, putting in parks and all of that. So people start feeling that too, and that in itself will generate employment, but also change the way where we live. And you're gonna, before the end of the year, or maybe early next year, you're gonna hear a lot more about that, about where this spending will go. So if everybody thinks that we could give, remember one time when Professor Clive Thomas said we should give 5,000 per family. And we thought we had 200,000 households, but it's more like maybe closer to 300,000 households. But if it was just 200,000, that's $1 billion US dollars a year. We have just over 500 million now in the fund, and that's after nearly 2 years. We don't have money at scale to give all of these things out. But the capacity, the curve will go steeply. As you get to 2024 and 2025, that's when more resources will come in. Right now, we have to look at jobs, infrastructure, healthcare, education, keeping our people safe in their homes, housing, trying to work on housing. These are the key things. There would, at some point in time, maybe cash transfers, but to targeted groups, not generalized cash transfers. Yes, and of course, wages will go up too in the public service as you get more resources, because then you can finance it. But not to finance it only for the period when you have oil, and when the oil disappears, you don't have a revenue stream to finance increased wages, because that's a recurrent expenditure. You have to develop the rest of the economy to ensure that the wages that you increase now are sustainable in the long run. Because many countries that have had oil, like Trinidad and Tobago, they fell into that trap. And now they have massive fiscal deficits that are killing the economies. Yes.
Sir, Navendra Siraj, Guyana Chronicle. On the topic of Guyana benefiting from its forest resources, can you say how discussions are going with Norway on a possible new GRIF, or whether this will await the completion of the LCDS?
Yeah, we have some bilaterals with Norway in Scotland. I'm leaving tomorrow morning, and but Norway is supporting the art and leaf, and so it could be that through a multilateral mechanism that Norway is now contributing into, that the next agreement will come. And that is the one that underwrites your forest carbon at $10 per ton.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, Liron Brummel, NCN. Just a few questions for clarification. One, on putting the architecture in place for the auctioning of blocks, but specifically the audit into Exxon. With the Ghanaian team coming here and looking to build capacity with locals and international companies, are they going to play a part, one, in assisting us based on auditing from their experience, because you said you were impressed with the model that they have? That's one. Two, I can tie, there is the issue with the Attorney General spoke about a couple of weeks ago about lands sold, Finance Minister, former Finance Minister Winston Jordan. And if you can give us an update on perhaps the status of that investigation into that, and if I can tie it to yesterday's release from the Ministry of Local Government about questionable transactions by the City Council selling lands below its market value. An update on that, please.
Yes. On the one with Jordan, I haven't followed up. I have not been dealing with that matter. That's why I said I have to find out myself, because I saw he's now the conscience of Guyana once again, and people don't know about the illegalities that were committed there and in Nissil, etc. They think that we've forgotten, but we haven't forgotten. It's just that we're busy doing other things. We didn't make them the target as when we came into office, like what they did with us. But we have to examine that. The City Council, from what we're gathering, is a cabal within the City Council that has been going around and trying to find out all the little bits of land that the City Council own in the city, including on the waterfront. And they have been quietly trying to broker deals with individuals. If the City Council wants to sell its land or lease its land out, it should go through a public process, because the broker deals are generating bribes for some of the people there, and the City Council gets a tiny fraction of what the market value of the rental should be, or the sale of the land is. And we've seen it with a small cabal working in there. So the City Council cannot maximize its value. The councillors should pay attention to it, although there are a few of them who are doing this. And I think they're very concerned that the clerk has not been approving these transactions.
And just the follow-up.
And the third one was?
The follow-up on whether the team
from Ghana will the team from Ghana. So I've spoken with the Vice President and his team, and I had a full meeting with all the heads of department there in Ghana and the President. The Minister of Finance met with me and he said he will support the teams coming down. We're hoping to have a longer-term engagement with Ghana. So the team that's coming in now, we want them to focus, because of the pace at which we are moving, on local content, the Natural Resources Fund to amend that, and the oil and gas, the gas to shore project. Those are moving forward. In the longer run, it is the Petroleum Commission, how we put together the Petroleum Commission, the amendment of the law, the Petroleum Act, which was passed in 1986, that needs to be updated. Their experience with auctions, there's the audit, all of these things are on the table. But this is the immediate team coming in here. I've also met with the private sector in Ghana, and many of these companies are there that they have resources and they have the skills. We're hoping, hopefully before the end of the year or early next year, to have a delegation, maybe about 30 from the private sector, come to Guyana. And they know about our local content policy, so they're going to be looking for partnerships with Guyanese companies. So I've already spoken with the Private Sector Commission, but I hope all the Guyanese companies would have a big seminar. We'd introduce them to the private sector. The president will speak and stuff. A big team coming in from their private sector to look at investing here too, and they know that they'd have to come in partnerships because they too had a local content legislation. So the others had to come in partnership with them. But they have some good expertise in the private sector in areas that they're working at supplying services and goods to the oil and gas industry, some very high-end technology.
Thank you.
Mr. Jagdeo, final question from me. Can you say if the government is satisfied with the performance of Gaisuco's CEO? Have you taken note of the public criticisms, and how are those being addressed? Yeah,
sure. Now clearly we have to strengthen management at Gaisuco. That is without doing an assessment of the performance of the CEO or not. I've had less of an interaction with the sector from a management perspective in the last several months because I'm focused heavily on the planning agenda. But clearly, whether the CEO stays or not, we have to strengthen management and outcome and investments. And we're looking now at bringing greater private involvement in the sector. We are looking at some also strategic shifts in some of the areas. Is there anything else? If not, thank you very much. Thank you.